Go ahead and get started. Thank you to everybody who is joining us today. Thank you for joining us on the live stream as well as on Zoom. Just to let everybody know, the live stream portion will stream the speakers, and then after that, the live streaming will end and the conversation will continue in Zoom. So if you want to be part of the discussion, and we do welcome everybody to be a part of that, please join us on the Zoom meeting either now or after the discussion actually begins. But with that, I would like to again welcome everybody to 1 year after Dobbs, the fight for reproductive justice, sponsored by the Tempest Collective. We're glad that you're here with us today, especially on your long weekend, and we are just happy to have as many of you here as we do. My name is Mary Jen Davies. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be chairing this afternoon's event. The Tempest Collective aims to create a space for the left to come together to discuss and debate. Our goal is to put forward a revolutionary vision that is clear and understandable, that weighs in on strategic and tactical questions, offers concrete guidance as well as political theory, and presents a consistent set of working class politics from below. Tempest is a membership-based organization with chapters in Chicago, LA, New York, and throughout the United States. You can learn more about us by visiting tempestmag.org. Today's event will address the movement for reproductive justice. Last year, the Supreme Court overruled the will of the majority and overturned Roe v. Wade, unleashing states across the country to impose bans and restrictions on abortion rights. Some states have defended the right with shield laws and even enshrined in their state constitutions. But in over half the country, abortion is either banned or under severe restriction and all but inaccessible. This panel of activists will talk about these conditions, efforts to defend rights, and ideas and strategies to mount a defense and a counteroffensive to win full reproductive justice. In a moment, we will hear from the speakers. They will speak for about 10 minutes each. Following the presentations, we will have an open discussion where anyone can share experiences or observations and raise questions or disagreements. And again, that will take place only on Zoom. I will explain how the discussion will run after the presentations. As a reminder, we do expect comradely behavior from all. Threats, intimidation, or bigotry of any kind will result in your expulsion from the space. We are very excited to hear our speakers, and we have a really fantastic lineup today. So I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they will be speaking. First, we will hear from Kenyatta Thomas. Kenyatta is the State Communications Strategist at Physicians for Reproductive Health, where they elevate the stories and expert voices of medical providers in the media. They began their career in comprehensive sex education advocacy with Teen Health Mississippi at 17 years old, before branching out to the broader reproductive justice movement through work with Advocates for Youth, the National Network of Abortion Funds, and Reproduction. Kenyatta is based in Las Vegas, Nevada. Next, we will hear from Camila Valle. Camila is an editor, writer, translator, and member of New York City for Abortion Rights and the editorial board of Spectre Journal. Her translations of Las Thesis Set Fear on Fire is out now from Verso Books. Next up, we will hear from Jenny Brown. Jenny is a member of the National Women's Liberation and assistant editor at Labor Notes. She is a co-author of the Red Stockings book, Women's Liberation and National Healthcare, Confronting the Myth of America, and author of Birth Strike, The Hidden Fight Over Women's Work. Her latest book is Without Apology, The Abortion Struggle Now. Finally, Nancy Welch will close us up. Nancy is a professor emerita of English at the University of Vermont, where she helped found the union representing full and part-time faculty. Her latest book, 10 More Things About Us, a collection of stories about caregiving, is forthcoming from Black Lawrence Press. She is a member of Tempest and of her Upper Valley, Vermont and New Hampshire, Democratic Socialists of America, and an activist in Upper Valley for abortion rights. Thank you all for joining us. Kenyatta, go ahead and get us started.
Thank you for that introduction, Mary. To start out, I guess I want to provide some preface that I wear a lot of different hats in this arena. I'm originally from Mississippi, which if everyone is aware of, that is where the Dobbs v. Jackson case originated from. And I remember doing advocacy when the case was starting just before I left the state to move to DC. So I have been an organizer in like this in hostile states. I have also worked with abortion funds and with advocacy groups at the state and national level. And I think it's important to really preface this by saying that Dobbs wasn't the beginning of the abortion crisis in America. For so many communities, Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, young people, people in rural communities, and queer folks, barriers to abortion access have always existed. And so when we're talking about Dobbs, and even when some people say the language of restoring Roe, we are ignoring the fact that even when Roe was still the law of the land, there were millions of people who still could not access abortion on their own terms. They had to face so many barriers, whether that's psychological testing or 72-hour wait periods, or if they're a young person having to wait for parental approval. A lot of barriers already existed. And unfortunately, with the Dobbs decision, these barriers and different systems of oppression have only gotten worse. Because abortion bans are impacting these communities that already face other systemic barriers that already prevented them from accessing the full spectrum of reproductive and sexual health care. So people in states such as Mississippi, Texas, or Louisiana, they have to travel hundreds of miles for care because the surrounding states are continuing to pass more and more restrictions and bans. So it's made even worse by the fact that with these laws and legislation, they're written by people who are not medical experts. These legislators have not gone to medical school. They really know nothing about the situations that they are creating laws about. And so with that, there's been this gray area legally that's been created. And so for medical providers, they're left unsure about the best course of action to take because this legislation has vague language about what counts as risk of the life to the pregnant person. And so with that, often what ends up happening is that pregnant people are left unable to access care. Hospitals are delaying life-saving medical care because of this legislation, and doctors being unsure about what to do. They don't know if they will face legal action. They don't know if their patient will die. The best action for them is to just wait because of the actions of legislators who are not inside these clinics. They are not in emergency rooms. They are not providing medical care to these communities that they are creating laws and legislation about. And so the impact has spread to people. It affects doctors, it affects people who are seeking abortions, and it's also been affecting pregnant people. Pregnant people have been unable to access care when they're having a miscarriage. They have been turned away from receiving care when they have an ectopic pregnancy because, again, of vague legislation and laws. And another impact of that has also been the fear of surveillance and potential criminalization. So with the impact of all these laws, and essentially what's been created is that people are afraid to get healthcare because if there's a risk of, if someone has a miscarriage, they're opening themselves up, and not because of any fault of their own, but because of law and legislation, to surveillance and criminalization. Because of the law and medical experts not knowing what to do in terms of the law and abortion being restricted, people are facing criminalization and surveillance. And so despite the fact that miscarriage is an incredibly common outcome of pregnancy, even prior to Dobbs, people face criminalization for having miscarriages. And what essentially has been created is that people's entire bodies and all of the different circumstances and different outcomes that can happen cannot be summed up neatly into the legislation that all of these people are writing. And the effects are only going to get more and more intense. We've already seen that states with abortion bans are also seeing a drop in their number of OBGYN residency applicants because medical providers don't want to open themselves up to legal action for simply doing their jobs and providing healthcare. There's also the fact that abortion clinics in states where it may be less difficult to access abortion are overwhelmed. And so they can't effectively provide care to patients that are coming from their own states and to patients that are traveling. And so there's just this huge like mess of a problem already, but it's made worse by the legal attacks that are happening on medication abortion as well. There's misinformation that is being spread, despite the fact that SMA with mifepristone and misoprostol is incredibly safe and effective. There's this misinformation about it being dangerous, and that's how we're seeing these cases unfold legally. Again, mostly being spearheaded by people that are not medical experts. But most importantly, the things that give me hope are the advocates that are operating in so many different arenas to fight against these laws and these efforts, primarily young people, physician advocates, and abortion funds. So young people have been doing incredible work, even prior to Dobbs and during Dobbs and the landscape that we're currently in. I have the wonderful opportunity to get to work with Advocates for Youth, which has young people doing work across the country on the state level and national and local level, fighting for abortion access and other reproductive and sexual health care rights. Specifically thinking about the Youth Abortion Support Collective, which is a nationwide network of young people who are committed to becoming expert resources on abortion and to making sure that the folks in our communities can understand all of the options and support that they need and have for abortion. And so young people have been doing incredible work, especially thinking about most recently in New York, student organizers through the Reproductive Justice Collective organized for a bill that now will require SUNY and SUNY colleges across the city and state to provide access to medication abortion at student health centers. And efforts like that were spearheaded by young people who are educating themselves about self-managed abortion. They are collaborating with abortion clinics and abortion funds and just doing incredible work because young people face so many barriers already to accessing abortion and care. And that work is amazing and inspirational. I truly think that young people are going to be a critical tentpole of this fight and for the future because of the fearlessness and the bravery and the willingness to stand up against these systems of oppression and to provide freedom and liberation. There's also the physician advocates that are giving hope. I work with Physicians for Reproductive Health, which has a network of nearly 500 physician advocates who are dedicated to providing compassionate, evidence-based abortion care to the communities they serve. And their advocacy work is happening in the media and the press, and they're providing testimony based on their experiences as actual medical experts to fight for their patients to be able to access the healthcare that they need. There's also abortion funds, and abortion funds are so incredibly critical in this fight. Every day, they're helping people overcome the financial and logistical barriers to access the abortions that they need. And so this fight is messy. There are a lot of different things happening, but I think that as we are going forward, I think that people are learning to find their niche. They're learning to figure out where they can fit in, how they can advocate for different things. But I think that regardless of the strategies and everything, it's important to really center reproductive justice, which is a framework of liberation that was gifted to us by a group of Black people, Black women specifically, that says that reproductive justice is the human right to have children, to not have children, and to raise the children that we do have in safe and healthy environments. And so I think that with keeping reproductive justice as the center and as the vision of what we're all fighting for, that we're really opening ourselves up to a path for liberation. But I think the most important thing to remember and to center is reproductive justice and listening to the most directly impacted communities, the people who are having abortions, the people who are going to need abortions, and the people who are already facing so much systemic oppression into accessing basic human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Camila.
Hi, thanks everybody. Thank you, Kenyatta and Mary, for preceding me in those great remarks. I'm going to be talking just a little bit about the abortion movement in Argentina and some lessons and questions I think we can be thinking about in the US context, which is different, but I think should really be looking to feminist movements in the global South, in Latin America, and in other parts of the world. I'm sorry, I'm a little sick. In Argentina, the abortion movement has been tied to other movements that have happened in the country and in the region. It won the legalization of abortion in December of 2020 in the context of mass uprisings around femicide, against austerity, against things like the external debt and the International Monetary Fund, imperialism, in the context of worker struggles, union struggles, queer struggles, student struggles. And so the abortion movement was really kind of a piece in this broader landscape of different dynamics in society that were happening. And it is, of course, really different to fight for abortion and the legalization of abortion in a country that hasn't had that versus a country like the US that won that right and then had it taken away. But the abortion movement in Argentina was really kind of channeled through the national campaign for the right to abortion, of legal abortion. And it was centered around three very concrete demands. One was comprehensive sex ed in schools and other educational settings, free and accessible birth control, and free abortion on demand as part of its socialized healthcare system. And within that campaign and within that fight, there were various networks that were focusing on different parts of the picture. So for example, there were networks that were trying to make abortion pills more widely available in Argentina and in the region, of course, illegally. So in a kind of underground market and network. Educators who were working on writing curricula, doing research, physicians and nurses and midwives who were talking about their experiences in clinical settings, and doulas, for example, who would accompany people through their abortions, even when it was illegal. And so there was this whole infrastructure that was built and organized around this idea of the national campaign, while it was also at the same time pushing for like a legal bill, right, to legalize abortion in the country. And so I think these two things that were happening at the same time, the kind of legal route of having a law that enshrined, right, the right to abortion federally, right, in the whole country, as well as actual networks of people who are organizing at the grassroots level from the bottom up. And both of these things really coalesced into building pressure on the state and on the government to basically say that if they wanted any control over the situation, they would basically have to legalize abortion and institute these demands that the movement was pushing for. And so I think what's really key in this for me is a couple of things. One is that the abortion fight was really about the fight against neoliberalism and the fight against just a general crisis of society that people were experiencing, as well as a fight against the kind of reentrenchment of traditional gender roles, right? The nuclear family as the only place where people can seek refuge, get care, and this nuclear family imagined as a kind of cis, hetero, patriarchal family. And this was also a fight against the state, against the government, that would rather, make these kind of criminal pacts with the International Monetary Fund to pay this external debt that the people had no responsibility for, and the government was imposing austerity instead of giving them care that they wanted and deserved. And I think in the US, we have same types of infrastructures. So as Kenyatta was saying, abortion funds, for example, that provide financial and logistical support to people seeking abortions. We have these networks of people mailing pills, even in states with restrictions, educational components, these campaigns, a lot of them spearheaded by young people like the Reproductive Justice Collective campaign to get abortion pills widely available on all public college campuses in New York. All of these things I think are happening at the same time. But it is, I think, on the whole, in a position of kind of defensiveness against, this onslaught of attacks that we know are going to keep coming and are going to make the situation worse and worse. And so these infrastructures that we've built for a long time are facing more strain than ever, right? Because of the situation and the dynamics that Kenyatta was talking about. And I think this has real kind of concrete reasons. One is obviously the Dobbs decision and the overturning of the constitutional right to abortion through Roe, as well as things like racism and the ways that society in the US is structured that have really impacted certain communities, medical racism, right? The history of obstetrics, questions like the maternal mortality rate, as well as the kind of NGOization of the abortion movement after Roe was passed in the early 70s. So things like Planned Parenthood being the kind of main face of the kind of mainstream abortion movement, even though they're not the ones who are primarily dealing with people or providing care or providing care in restricted states or doing abortions when people are further along in their pregnancies, things like that. So I say all of this to kind of maybe start a discussion in the discussion portion of the event today about ways in which that we can think about or imagine points where I think we can start maybe coalescing nationally. I think there's a lot of community-based organizing, which is absolutely vital. And I think there's also the question of things being uneven, right, in different states because of the different laws. So something that might work in one state is not going to work in another state because of the different laws. And it's uneven by design, right? And so I think one of the challenges is, unlike in Argentina, where you can have a national campaign that has 3 demands that is for the entire country, that's a little trickier, right, in the US when there's different dynamics in different states and different places. But I do want to kind of open up a conversation around what we can envision or what we can think about when we think about a kind of national movement that, instead of being on the defensive, always embattled, being kind of trying to win back some of what we've lost. And I have some ideas of what that could be, but would really like to hear from other people. One is the overturning of the Hyde Amendment, which is the legal amendment that precludes any federal funds from being used for any kind of abortion service. So if, for example, you're on Medicaid, you can't use it to access abortion care, which basically means that poor and working class people have absolutely no access to abortion, even in cases where it is legal. What do we think about the kind of different constitutional campaigns in different states to enshrine legal abortion in the state constitution, questions of access, questions of healthcare. In Argentina, for example, we have public healthcare. And so when you talk about free abortion on demand, that's a much easier kind of thing to imagine when you think that healthcare is a right and should be free for people. In a country like the US where people don't think that, it's not the reality. What does that mean? So yeah, just wanted to throw out some thoughts, and very much looking forward to discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Camila. Next, we will hear from Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to the panel. The first 2 talks are really great, and I'm pleased to be participating. I'm going to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the context of our struggles around abortion and birth control, basically in the context of a global capitalist freakout about low birth rates. I wrote this book called Birth Strike that was published in 2019, and I had to dig into think tank reports and books where people were talking to each other to really find evidence of this concern. There was a lot of evidence there, but this has really accelerated in the last 4 years. I mean, I get the Financial Times, and not a week goes by without 3 or 4 articles about the effects of low birth rates, aging populations, declining populations, and the effects on profitability, public expenditure, and inflation. Europe's population is now shrinking in absolute terms, as Japan's has been for about a decade. And this is really a new situation for capital. Since the inception of the system, there has been this underlying population growth, which has invisibly buoyed it up. And the effect of lower birth rates has been softened by immigration to rich countries, but now the birth rate in many of the sending countries, such as India, which, for example, in 1950 had a birth rate of 5.9 children per woman, is now below replacement at 2 children per woman. And Mexico, for example, very similar drop down to 1.9 now. The Philippines, a similar drop down to 1.9. And this is leading to fears among pro-immigration capitalists that the stream of adult labor into the US will slow to a trickle. And of course, lower birth rates accompany urbanization and lower infant mortality rates. Both of those are factors. But those processes are generally stable in the United States over the last 20 years, and we're still experiencing a decline in birth rates after staying weirdly high for the last few decades, probably due to some of the conditions that Kenyatta mentioned, where we really did not have good access to birth control and abortion, even though they were technically legal. Well, now the US birth rate is dropped to European levels around 1.65. We know why people are having fewer children. When we do consciousness raising in my group, National Women's Liberation, it's clearly visible in our own decisions to stop at 1 child, to decide not to have any. And the big factors are long work hours, high housing costs, unreliable health care, expensive or unattainable childcare, defunded schools, parks, and libraries, basically all of the things that push the costs and expenses of child rearing and even childbearing onto women and families, and shrink the available space, time, and support that are make it feasible to have kids. Half the country doesn't have $500 for an emergency. So when we get lectured by liberals about only having children when we can afford them, I don't know who they think is going to be able to afford them, right? So in countries with stronger labor movements, the response to lower birth rates has been to invest in free quality childcare, long paid parental leaves, like a year off for each parent, or 18 months to be split between the parents, plus national health care, longer paid vacations, lots of sick leave. And the answer here has basically been attacks on abortion and birth control. And occasionally in some states, we've won paid family leave provisions. A few cities have like pre-K, which is, I'm in New York City, and they're currently the Eric Adams administration is starving our pre-K system for funds. But once we have that context, we can see that these standard debates about abortion and some of the small bore nonprofit strategies don't really meet the moment. So of course, there's the losing strategy of just support Democrats, which has not been successful. But there's also the strategy of isolating abortion as a single issue and acting as though it can be disconnected from struggles around class power. And in the case of abortion in the early 70s, the ruling class was worried about high birth rates, which meant that we had some space to make this fight, and that has since closed up. One advantage is that now it is clearly about our reproductive work. And so if we see the fight over abortion and birth control as part of the general struggle of working people to rule our own lives, and to that end, the struggle for public provision of all necessities, then we can start to, I think, fold it into some of the other battles that we're having and see the connections. So in other words, our enemy on this question is not men, it's capital. And this is kind of related to the second thing I want to address, which is this question that I get asked a lot, which is, where is the abortion rights movement? Usually the questioner is expecting sustained street action, sort of like Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2020, and can't understand why that's not happening. Well, first, I question the assertion. There's a ton of work happening, as people are talking about. And a lot of the work is around getting people abortions, which is by nature not all that public, right? So that's one thing. But I think Camila made an interesting point that it is mostly, a lot of it is defensive. And so it's good to look back and see that, first of all, we didn't win abortion through an abortion rights movement. There was such a movement, and it clunked along between 1955 and 1973, trying to get narrow exceptions to the abortion laws. it didn't get anywhere until the women's liberation movement burst forth, did consciousness raising, discovered that people all over were risking their lives to get illegal abortions, which they had not seen as political until they did the consciousness raising, realized the paltry demands of the abortion rights movement would not have helped them at all, and started to demand full repeal of abortion laws. So we won legal abortion through a women's liberation movement that had abortion as one of its demands. And we can see in Argentina that it was one of the demands of a big movement that had a lot of different grievances. But we do have this peculiar landscape in the US where everything, no matter how connected, is taken up as an isolated single issue. Partly because in the US, politics is done by a lot of competing nonprofits, descendants of charities designed to cool out protest, and then they additionally have to carve out their area of expertise to compete with others to get funded. And then in theory, we would have most places, all of your issues are combined into a party. We have a party system in which the way to express our interests as a class just doesn't work, right? We have no party that represents even our general majority interests, never mind our class. So we end up with no mechanism to vote on the things that are the most important in our lives. And for a movement, we're left with this fragmented, non-profitized clamoring of 100 issues. So it's no surprise that among the million issues, abortion, having been extracted from its natural place as part of the fight for the control of our lives and our time, isn't a movement unto itself. Second, where there is still a shred of effective democratic action available to people, and it's getting narrower, referenda in Michigan, Kentucky, several other states, people joined in massive numbers to make those referenda successful. The people power is really astonishing. In Michigan, I remember talking to longtime feminist activists before they decided to launch the campaign. They were very trepidatious about the amount of signatures needed and other obstacles, but they quickly overshot their signature goal to get it on the ballot. So I think we can see that the main problem, as with so many things we're facing right now, is a lack of political levers to pull on the part of the majority. We have little or no control over the courts. The Senate is locked up by a minority that can stop anything they want. Protesting doesn't seem to do much. But where there are tiny bits of democracy, people will run into the breach. And for example, something that I'm involved in Florida, the movement is just now launching a petition campaign to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot to secure legal abortion. If we're successful, that will be on the 2024 general election ballot. And we think this has potential to be a huge effort that can build grassroots power in Florida with potentially wide-reaching consequences, because we are facing really repressive laws in Florida. We just had a 6-week ban signed. It hasn't gone into effect. It's waiting for the Supreme Court. So those are a few ideas.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Finally, we will hear from Nancy.
Thank you. And Phil, are you able to show that image? And if not, I can try to do it. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all. I'm really honored to be here and excited for the discussion. I want to start with this image by taking us back to summer 2006. Not a year after the catastrophe of Hurricane Katrina, when the U.S. Department of Homeland Security ran this ad in upscale magazines such as Food and Wine. "Everyone should have a plan," the headline moralistically intones. A tagline adds, "There's no reason not to." When I first encountered this ad, I read it as a pitiful attempt by FEMA, which is housed by Homeland Security, to rehabilitate its reputation after having abandoned predominantly Black and brown Gulf Coast residents in Katrina's wake. The ad, as I saw it, was part of the vast ideological apparatus that has long served the neoliberal evisceration of all social supports by scapegoating people who are poor, working class, queer, elderly, BIPOC, migrant, disabled, rural, anyone living outside this ad's image of the self-reliant nuclear family, which, as historian Stephanie Kuntz amply documents, has largely existed only in American imagination. This ad, however, has continually returned to me over the years as something more than temporary cover for appalling neglect in a single instance of national emergency. Today, I also read everyone should have a plan as the unveiled expression of the crisis of care that all forms of capitalism, and neoliberal capital in particular, engender. A crisis for which the capitalist class has no solution save offloading care work onto the family and low-wage workers. This crisis also reaches beyond those this ad implicitly scapegoats. Decades of neoliberal assault on state programs and social provisioning have strained beyond breaking even those who may match some of the features of this American family image. White cisgender, breadwinning dad, and stay-at-home mom with a minivan and someplace to flee. Consider that just a few months after Katrina, Hurricane Rita exposed the vulnerability of anyone in the US who can't commandeer a private jet to escape a disaster zone. The flight of Houston residents from Rita's path, creating what was then termed the world's largest traffic jam, as 2.5 million do-it-yourselfers jammed highways, many out of gas, resulting in the deaths of more than 100, including 24 dead when a nursing home bus caught fire. From Katrina and Rita to the poison pipes of Flint, Michigan, the Western states wildfires, and the COVID-19 shortages of ICU beds and baby formula, the capitalist class faces an escalating existential crisis: how to ensure current and next generations of fit and ready workers without paying a profit-reducing dime for their reproduction. And for the working class, there is the escalating existential crisis of how to provide for ourselves with housing, transportation, education, healthcare, childcare, and elder care. And you can go ahead and stop sharing the image now. This is the crisis of care we need to consider when we identify the drivers of the bans on abortion and on gender-affirming healthcare. As Eric Moroney argues in a recent article for Tempest, we need to understand these attacks as part of the long-running ruling class offensive against social provisioning. Understood through this lens, current attacks on abortion rights and LGBTQ liberation are not, as Jenny also just stressed, cultural issues detached from capitalist crises at the points of production. These attacks are instead integral to the continuing ruling class program to grow wealth, and to do so by leaving heavily gendered and racialized care work to the family, and by surveilling and criminalizing bodies to ensure that some body or many bodies are carrying out the care work that capitalism does not want to pay for, but utterly depends upon and will go to great lengths to dictate and control. Capitalism seeks, as it must, to impose social reproduction from above, its necessary conditions for continuation and expansion, including by presenting as unassailable common sense that everyone should have a plan and there is no reason not to. Our fight then is for social reproduction from below, the rights to healthy, happy, and fully realized lives in systems of social support and environmental stewardship free from the imperatives of profit-making. Powerfully articulating our side, as Kenyatta earlier described, is the Black feminist framework of reproductive justice. Reproductive justice asserts the right to have children, the right not to have children, and the right to raise children and live in communities of safety and support. Reproductive justice spotlights how abortion rights not only intersect with the struggles and demands for trans lives, Black lives, Indigenous lives, and Palestinian lives, but they're inextricable braid. Across sites of struggle in workplaces and in communities for full access to abortion and gender-affirming healthcare, for clean water and safe housing, to halt the construction of Atlanta's Cop City and Israel's settler colonialist dispossession of Palestinians, we find shared struggles for social reproduction on our terms. I hope that in discussion, we can explore the strategies a reproductive justice framework can illuminate. Here, I will sketch 3 directions. First, we need obviously to build and learn from existing networks of mutual aid to provide support that the state denies and to defend those whose bodies and lives the state would criminalize. Locally, for my abortion rights coalition, mutual aid has included working with New Hampshire's Reproductive Freedom Fund to make Plan B emergency contraception available without charge and without question in bookstores, coffee houses, and taquerias. In 6 months, we have distributed more than 500 Plan B doses just in the towns of Hanover and Lebanon. Importantly, we do this work as much as possible in full public light, both to deprivatize everyday needs for sexual and reproductive health care, and also to call out those who have failed to provide for those needs. For example, on the campus of wealthy Dartmouth College, Sunrise Movement students distribute free Plan B along with offering mutual aid support for food, housing, healthcare, and debt relief for working class students. In response to news story criticism that if it weren't for the free Plan B distributed through Sunrise, Dartmouth students would have to pay $15 a dose at the Student Health Center, the administration has recently indicated it will now offer Plan B at no charge. Second, beyond mutual aid, we need to identify and insist upon, as was earlier discussed, the intersections of our struggles at the points of production and social reproduction, workplace and community, and to do so through that prism of reproductive justice. Here are 2 local examples of what that can look like. At Dartmouth, undergraduate and graduate student workers, the majority of whom are working class, female, queer, and BIPOC, have recently won labor union recognition with demands that include health and mental health leave, affordable and safe housing, and childcare. Also in New Hampshire, our Repro Fund supports abortion care for people no matter their state or country of residence, and funds not only medical and surgical abortion, but also transportation, hotel, childcare, and lost hours from work. The fund additionally sponsors campaigns to support gender-affirming healthcare and pretrial bail to reunite families. Third, we should, when we can, work with politicians and national abortion rights organizations towards reproductive justice goals. In Vermont, to win a constitutional amendment and shield law, and in New Hampshire to defeat a bill targeting transgender teens. But we must also build organizations that can work independently, to picket anti-abortion centers, to defend clinics and drag story hours, even if the NGOs and Democratic Party players refrain from participation or even oppose these actions. What we need above all is to transform the victories and lessons of our local and regional initiatives into an organized force to create the kind of constitutional crisis that Camila just described in Argentina. This is not an impossible order, given the crisis of care that the US capitalist class is seeking through desperate and repressive means to manage, and given that in conditions of COVID emergency, the US government authorized so much direct aid that, the New York Times reported, the poverty rate was temporarily cut in half. Now, as we face bans on our bodies and minds, and also the cruel end to pandemic housing, food, and Medicaid programs, we need, wherever we are organizing, to join the call of we produce, we demand with we teach, we nurse, we nurture, we love, and we require. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. This was a really fantastic panel, and you've definitely given us a lot to consider. So thank you all so much for your comments. We are about to move into the discussion period. So again, if you would like to participate in the discussion aspect of this, that will only take place on Zoom. If you are chiming in via live stream, this is where the discussion will actually end. So if you want to participate, please join us in Zoom. Thank you.